Julian Carter had flown thousands of miles before, but never had a seat cost him this much before wheels even left the ground. It was a bright, polished morning at JFK Airport when Julian stepped into the first-class cabin of SkyBright Airlines Flight 214. At 41, the founder and CEO of Carter Equity Group carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had long since learned that power doesn't need to raise its voice. His charcoal gray suit, expertly tailored, whispered class. His boarding pass read 2A, a seat he had chosen specifically for this 3-hour flight to Denver, where a historic $120 million deal with SkyBright's executive board awaited his signature. Julian had spent the last 6 months poring through the airline's outdated financials, identifying vulnerabilities in their fleet, customer service model, and long-term market positioning. He wasn't just offering them money, he was offering transformation, efficiency, modernization, survival. And he wasn't flying first class to indulge. He needed the space, the focus, and a little quiet to review his final presentation before stepping into that boardroom. But peace wasn't on the flight manifest. As Julian settled into his seat, placing his tablet neatly in front of him, a flight attendant approached. Mid-40s, blonde, uniformed pressed to perfection. The name tag read Tracy Milton. "Boarding pass, sir?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a tone that hovered on the edge of suspicion. Julian raised an eyebrow slightly but handed it over with practiced politeness. "Good morning." Tracy scanned the pass, lips pursed. "And your name is—" "Julian Carter." She paused, glancing from the boarding pass to his face. "And you're sure this is your assigned seat?" Julian's face didn't flinch. "Yes, I booked it 2 weeks ago. I can show you the email confirmation if necessary." She hesitated, then handed it back with a smile that barely touched her eyes. "Of course, thank you." She walked away without offering the complimentary drink she had already placed in the hands of 3 white passengers nearby. Julian watched, expression unreadable, then turned back to his tablet. But he could feel the subtle shift in the air. Something unspoken had been stirred. In the galley behind him, something else was happening. Gregory Langston, SkyBright's vice president of operations, had boarded quietly. Tall, silver-haired, born into wealth and entitlement. To him, SkyBright wasn't just a company, it was a legacy. His family had deep roots in aviation, and the idea of a black-led equity firm gaining financial and governance influence over his airline didn't sit well. He leaned toward Tracy, his voice low. "Seat 2A. We have a VIP who always sits there. Make sure it's available." Gregory didn't need to explain who the VIP was. Charles Emerson, a longtime board affiliate and Gregory's personal friend from a country club in Connecticut, was flying in last minute. It didn't matter that Julian had booked the seat fairly. To Gregory, certain spaces still belonged to certain people. The rest could be reaccommodated. Back in 2A, Julian glanced up as another flight attendant arrived. "Mr. Carter, may I see your boarding pass again? Our system's showing a mix-up." For a moment, Julian said nothing. Then with composed grace, he handed it over. "Here you go." The attendant frowned, clearly confused. "It says 2A. Looks correct." She returned it and moved on. Julian's fingers tightened slightly around the tablet. He'd seen this dance before. Delays, questions, quiet attempts to wear down his legitimacy. This wasn't new. What was new was what came next. Minutes later, Charles Emerson boarded, clearly flustered. "What do you mean my seat isn't available?" He barked at the gate agent. "I'm sorry, Mr. Emerson. The flight is full." Gregory emerged from the galley, gesturing subtly to Tracy. Within moments, Tracy approached Julian again, smile fixed and hollow. "Mr. Carter," she began, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We have a situation with seating. We are kindly asking for your cooperation to move to the economy temporarily. We'll offer a travel voucher as compensation. Julian didn't respond immediately. The cabin fell into that unmistakable hush, half anticipation, half complicity. He spoke calmly, clearly. I booked this seat weeks ago, and I intend to remain in it. Tracy's smile vanished. Gregory stepped forward from behind her, mask of authority in place. We can do this the easy way, Mr. Carter, he said with a measured voice. Or the more difficult way. Julian looked at him, eyes cold and unwavering. He pulled out his phone. A notification had just arrived. $25 million from Carter Equity to SkyBright. Processed. With one motion, Julian tapped the screen. Transaction reversed. Julian Carter walked down the aisle of economy class in silence. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have, though no one spoke. Passengers glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Some with curiosity, others with discomfort, but none with intervention. This wasn't just a seat change. It was a message one Julian had received many times before, in different forms. At row 34, a middle seat waited, cramped, wedged between two strangers who offered him only narrowed glances and the barest shift of their knees. Julian eased into the space with dignity and tact, though his knees pressed against the tray table in front of him and the overhead vent refused to work. He didn't sigh, he didn't curse. He just straightened his cuffs and pulled out his phone. Notifications were piling up. The reversal of the $25 million transfer had already sent ripples through Carter Equity's internal systems. Julian opened the encrypted chat used only by his senior team. Julian, situation on board, reverse the first payment, SkyBright actions, racially motivated seating reassignment. We'll explain. Leona Hayes, COO. Are you safe? Julian, yes, for now. Prepare crisis protocol. Start media monitoring. Collect video if it surfaces. Just as he put his phone down, the woman to his right shifted further toward the window, pulling her coat tighter. Across the aisle, a younger man subtly raised his phone and began recording. Their eyes met. The man gave a small nod, an unspoken signal of solidarity. Julian returned it with a quiet blink. He didn't want this attention, but he knew better than most that power rarely asks how you want to be seen. It simply puts a lens on you and waits for you to flinch. 20 minutes into the flight, he tapped the call button for water. The attendant arrived with a half-filled plastic cup, sloshing the contents as she placed it on his tray without a word. Excuse me, Julian said evenly. May I have the rest of the cup? We're short on supplies today, she replied curtly and turned away. Seconds later, she handed a full can of ginger ale to a white passenger across the aisle. The man beside Julian, middle-aged, casual, polite, frowned. You just gave him a full can, he said, pointing. The attendant didn't respond. Julian simply smiled faintly and dabbed his tablet dry with a napkin. The microaggressions were stacking like bricks. But Julian wasn't new to this. His mother's words from years ago whispered in his mind, they'll try to shrink you, son. Don't you dare make yourself small, just so they can stay comfortable. A sudden buzz pulled him back. Another notification. Luggage rerouted. Destination changed to Minneapolis. Julian stared at the screen. His suitcase, containing not only clothes but physical presentation documents, hard copy contracts, and personal items, was now hundreds of miles off course. No explanation. Coincidence? Hardly. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and began recording a voice memo. Flight 214, economy seat 34B approx, 11:40 a.m. Flight attendant Tracy Milton refused a full beverage, commented on the seating arrangement. Luggage was rerouted without cause. Flight supervisor Gregory Langston is present. As the voice memo was saved, his inbox filled with more emails. Subject, SkyBright, flight incident. Viral 1 video had surfaced, then 5. Passengers who had witnessed his removal were uploading clips. Black CEO kicked out of first class, the headlines read, paid for 2A, remove for white VIP. On one clip, you could hear Charles Emerson say clearly, "Some of us belong in first class." The backlash was immediate. SkyBright's social media accounts were flooded. Julian's LinkedIn profile exploded with support. Journalists began sending interview requests, but Julian stayed quiet. He knew how these things worked. Public opinion was a wave, but it could turn as quickly as it came. What mattered now was control. He opened a secure file labeled Langston Report, a dossier Carter Equity had compiled weeks earlier on every senior executive at SkyBright. It was part of routine due diligence for the $120 investment. But in Gregory Langston's case, the notes had been thicker. 3 prior complaints of racial bias. 2 settled quietly. One executive was reassigned after accusing Langston of unspoken but systematic exclusion. Julian had flagged him as a risk to long-term equity alignment. Now the risk had a face, a voice, and a name. And Julian was done playing defensively. He sent a voice message to Leona. Launch full timeline archive. Start compiling all videos, statements, and employee testimonies. Quietly reach out to Naomi for investigations. Also, prep media assets. The public is watching now, and we don't just explain, we lead. Across the aisle, the same young man who'd been filming leaned slightly forward. "Hey," he said quietly, glancing around. "What they did to you, not okay. Just so you know, I posted the video. It's already blowing up." Julian gave a slight nod. "Thank you," he said softly. He looked down at his phone. Shared justice for Julian. First class were who SkyBright exposed. They thought they had reduced him to silence. What they didn't realize was he was only getting started. The corporate headquarters of SkyBright Airlines rose like a glass monolith above downtown Denver. Its pristine facade, designed to evoke the curve of wings in ascent, reflected clouds and sunlight alike, projecting the illusion of transparency. But inside, behind tinted boardroom windows and soundproof walls, the company was scrambling. By the time Julian Carter stepped off the plane, the first-class debacle was trending globally. His phone was a storm of pings, news outlets, civil rights advocates, investors, board members who'd once ignored his emails were suddenly very interested in talking. Yet, as he passed the arrivals lounge, his gaze was calm. He wasn't here for an apology. He was here for leverage. Back at Carter Equity's crisis response room, his senior team had mobilized with precision. Leona Hayes, his COO, ran point on financial risk. Derek Huang, legal counsel, compiled violations for potential civil claims. Naomi Clark, head of investigations, had already discovered something remarkable. Gregory Langston has 5 sealed HR complaints for racial bias and 1 whistleblower memo naming him as the architect of passenger profiling practices. Julian nodded once. "We document, then escalate." At that same moment, Gregory Langston sat 3 floors above Julian's destination, pacing his office with unease. "What do you mean the video hit 10 million? He snapped into his phone. Tracy Milton's voice trembled on the other end. I didn't know who he was. Mr. Langston didn't even say anything. He just tapped something on his phone and then sat there." Gregory clenched his jaw. "Stay quiet, say nothing. We'll frame this as a miscommunication. We do not let one incident derail the deal." But it was already unraveling. When Julian arrived at the SkyBright boardroom, Philip Monroe, the CEO, was waiting with forced optimism and an extended hand. "Julian," he began, "let's chalk this up to operational confusion. We're sincerely sorry." "I'm sure you are," Julian replied evenly, then slid a folder across the table. Inside was an updated term sheet. "I'm willing to proceed with the deal," he said, voice steady. but with revised governance conditions. Philip flipped through the pages, his face tightening. 2 seats for Carter Equity on the SkyBright board, a third-party audit of internal discrimination practices, restructuring of customer service protocols to prevent future bias, removal of Gregory Langston from operational oversight. Julian, Philip said carefully, this is aggressive. Julian leaned forward. So was calling armed security on a first-class passenger with a valid ticket. Meanwhile, the internet had already decided. Multiple passengers uploaded independent angles of the altercation. Hashtags evolved from sympathy to outrage. Civil rights organizations demanded investigations. Airline watchdogs began reviewing SkyBright's complaint history. Then came the leak. A former SkyBright employee posted an internal memo, circulated months earlier, outlining executive accommodations and cabin image management. Buried in the language was a section on preserving passenger comfort by discreet reassignment of individuals whose presence may disrupt premium expectations. The implications were staggering. Julian didn't need to say much. The documents spoke for themselves. Later that night, in a dimly lit hotel suite 2 blocks from SkyBright HQ, Julian reviewed the next phase of his plan. With Leona and Naomi on a secure call, he laid it out. We're not here to settle for lip service, he said. We push until this industry understands that exclusion has a cost. Silence is no longer free. Naomi added, we have a source, a flight attendant from a prior incident. Same VP, same pattern. She's willing to talk. Record everything, Julian instructed. Time-stamped. Secure it all. Then we build a coalition, not just against Gregory, but against the system that made someone like him untouchable. Leona's voice came in firm. You ready for the next level? Julian stared out the window, watching city lights flicker against the glass. I didn't come this far to blink. That evening, as Julian's team prepared the data vault for legal action, another piece fell into place. A direct email from Tracy Milton. Subject, I need to talk. He told me to move you. He said it didn't matter what your ticket said. I have the message saved. If I speak up, I'll lose everything. But I'm tired of pretending this isn't real. Julian's reply was short. You won't be alone. Let's talk tomorrow. We'll protect you. He closed his laptop, exhaled slowly, and poured himself a glass of water. The seat they'd stolen from him was just the surface. Now he was coming for the whole system. The next morning, the quarters of SkyBright Airlines' 38th floor were unusually silent, like the pause before a storm. Behind the reflective boardroom glass, Gregory Langston was growing more desperate by the hour. Overnight, 2 damning developments had surfaced. A second employee, Lisa Corman, a flight attendant, had quietly reached out to Julian's team. The viral video of Julian's removal had surpassed 15 million views, accompanied by a growing chorus of outrage. CEOs, celebrities, activists, even frequent flyers, calling for accountability. Gregory's plan to reduce Julian Carter to a seat misunderstanding had collapsed into rubble. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. Across the city, Julian entered a quiet cafe under heavy security surveillance. Tracy Milton sat nervously in the back corner, her eyes darting toward the windows. She wore no uniform today, only the look of someone caught between fear and conscience. Julian approached without fanfare, sliding into the seat across from her. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. Tracy shook her head. I owe the truth more than I owe my paycheck. She slid a small flash drive across the table. It's all there, she whispered. Voice memos, messages from Gregory, one from Charles Emerson saying, quote, get that man out of 2A. I won't sit next to one of those. I didn't know it'd go this far. Julian didn't flinch. It always goes this far when no one stops it. Back at Carter Equity's temporary command center, Naomi Clark reviewed the contents of the flash drive with meticulous precision. Every piece added weight to a growing mountain of evidence. Memos that classified black and brown passengers as image risks in premium cabins. Text threads with Gregory directly instructing staff to reassign anyone that looks non-premium when priority passengers requested. A secret database categorizing passengers by subjective profile suitability, a thinly veiled euphemism for race and class. Naomi turned to Leona on the video call. This is beyond PR. This is structural. Julian nodded from the head of the table. Then we treat it like an infrastructure failure, rooted, rotting, and ready to fall. But Gregory Langston wasn't going down quietly. From his office, he was busy working his network, calling reporters, leveraging board relationships, painting Julian as a disruptive investor using race to gain leverage. He even arranged a leak to the New York Business Review, falsely claiming that Carter Equity had liquidity problems and was using public outrage to mask financial instability. It was a classic deflection, and it was about to backfire. The following evening, Julian Carter appeared on 60 Minutes. Dressed in navy blue, seated across from anchor Andrea Miles, he didn't rage. He didn't blame. He simply told the story. With quiet precision, Julian recounted the flight, the demotion to economy, the humiliation. Then he presented the evidence, not just of his mistreatment, but of an entire system of racial preference disguised as policy. He didn't call for sympathy. He called for a standard. Don't tell me it was a misunderstanding, he said calmly. When multiple employees across multiple years were given the same quiet instruction, make sure the premium seats stay comfortable. Who gets to define that comfort, and at what cost? When the segment ended, the public response was seismic. SkyBright stock plummeted another 12% overnight. The FAA announced it would open a formal inquiry into the airline's internal practices. Civil rights organizations filed a joint complaint to the Department of Transportation. Most notably, Victoria Blake, a senior SkyBright board member, sent Julian a private message. Some of us are ready to talk. Privately, the silence has lasted long enough. At 3 a.m., Julian stood by the window of his hotel suite, phone buzzing in his hand. New text from Tracy. They've reassigned me to a performance review. I think I'm being prepped for termination. Lisa's brother just got pulled over. She thinks it's retaliation. Someone's watching my apartment. Julian's jaw tightened. He forwarded the messages to his security team with a single instruction: protect them at any cost. Then he turned to his laptop and opened the draft document titled Terms of Structural Accountability, SkyBright Airlines. He wasn't just demanding justice anymore. He was writing the new rules. The morning sun over Washington, D.C. was sharp and cold, almost surgical, when Julian Carter walked through the revolving doors of the Department of Transportation. He wasn't there as a victim. He was there as a force. Behind him, 23 documents, 12 sworn testimonies, 3 whistleblower recordings, and one undeniable truth. SkyBright Airlines hadn't just failed a passenger. It had upheld a quiet tradition of exclusion. But Julian's goal wasn't revenge. It was redesigned. At SkyBright's corporate tower, panic had turned to fracture. Victoria Blake, now leading the internal board inquiry, confronted CEO Philip Monroe with a choice: co-lead reform or step down. Multiple board members demanded Gregory Langston's termination. Investors threatened divestment unless measurable change was implemented. And then came the final blow. A second 60-minute special aired. Tracy Milton and Lisa Corman spoke publicly. With steady voices, they detailed Gregory's direct orders. They revealed passenger profiling policies, intimidation attempts, and internal memos that used words like cabin optics and socio-demographic reshuffling. By the time the program ended, SkyBright's market value had lost over $1.1 billion. Within 48 hours, Gregory Langston was terminated for cause. Philip Monroe resigned. The SkyBright board formally adopted Julian's terms of structural accountability, third-party oversight of passenger discrimination complaints, diversity benchmarks tied to executive bonuses, public transparency reports, and a newly created Office of Equity and Access led by Heather Stevens, once just a flight attendant, is now the face of reform. In a quiet moment, Julian sat aboard a SkyBright flight, not as a guest, but as chairman of the board. The same airline that once forced him to move now bore the weight of his signature on every policy. As the plane ascended, a new flight attendant handed him water in a full glass. She smiled and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." Julian looked out the window, knowing it wasn't just the altitude that had changed. Life lesson: discrimination thrives in silence, but silence can be shattered by one person who refuses to shrink. Power isn't just money, it's what you do with it when the system calls you out of your seat. Real reform isn't performative, it's structural, documented, and enforced. The goal isn't revenge, it's redesigning the room so the next Julian never gets asked to leave it. Even a system built on exclusion can be forced to change when truth is louder than tradition.